which is interesting because the other group that we have spent so much time with over the years is in somewhat of a similar situation. Not that you have a conservative prophet of the Mormon Church. The problem is that the succession methodology that has been developed within Mormonism is non-functional. What do I mean by that? You cannot convince me that Joseph Smith or even Brigham Young had in mind the idea that the Mormon Church should be led by the most doddering, aged, infirm person that you could possibly dig out of the hierarchy of the church in the first place. But that's what's happened. That's how it works. And it just seems like the Mormon hierarchy is so wedded to its own tradition that nobody has the guts to go, you know what, we need to change this. There needs to be a new way of getting a getting a prophet, they both start with P, getting a prophet who isn't 94 years old. How about someone in their 50s? I mean, what could happen if you could actually have an active, healthy, traveling prophet of the Mormon Church? But at the very same time, I mentioned when we came back, and keep in mind, we are praying toward what would, I consider, I think it would be a historic event this coming April in Utah. We are seeking to have a dialogue at Brigham Young University on campus with a leading New Testament scholar, Mormon New Testament scholar, on the subject of how we view the New Testament and its textual critical history. This is obviously extremely and vitally important, especially because of the interface that the Book of Mormon has with the text of the Old and New Testaments. And this was not an area of study of Mormonism until the past 30 years or so. You know, Talmage and some of those people had some knowledge of these things, but not in the sense of sending people out from Utah to get their PhDs someplace else and then come back. So, also in April is the non-200th anniversary. Is the non-200th anniversary of the first vision. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. According to LDS Scripture today, in the spring of 1820, hence the spring of 2020, it'll be 200 years. Spring of 1820, Joseph Smith went out into the Sacred Grove. It wasn't called the Sacred Grove back then, obviously. It's just woods behind the house. And had what's called the first vision, where he sees God the Father and Jesus Christ as separate, distinct individuals with physical bodies, and he's told he's not to join any of the churches. They're all corrupt. The creeds are an abomination. Professors are corrupt. And as we have said for a long, long time, that could not have happened in 1820. The Smiths didn't live there in 1820. The revivals to which the references were made, even including names of the Methodist minister, Reverend Lane, that did not take place until 1824. There was no joining of churches. The churches lost members in the area in 1820, but there was a huge increase in 1824. The revival took place in 1824. And so I say it's the non-200th anniversary because the only time frame that any of this could have happened will not be until 2024. So maybe we should plan on having the first vision really did not happen 200 years ago now signs in 2024. It was actually 200 years ago from now that it didn't happen. Yeah, we'll have to think on that. It'd be sort of hard to come up with a proper sign to make that work. Anyway, so this next conference is going to be a big conference because they're going to be talking about the first vision and all that stuff. And of course, we're planning on being there and going to get that first vision tract ready to go. Definitely have to have the first vision tract for that one. I mean, for the 200th anniversary of the non-first vision. So there are, they're going to be talking about the first vision and stuff like that. But I just think back to 1984, I think it was 1984. Somewhere around in there. I might have the date down there. I'm not gonna worry about it. Went up to Salt Lake City. I think this was the trip in the 64 Dodge Dart. I'm not sure. But it was just Michael Belleville and I. And that's when I went into the church. Back then, I'm not sure if I sent you the picture of the new library where they've taken the stuff out of the church office building and now it's in this really catty corner to the big, straight across the street from the meeting hall. They've put this big library up, but back then it was in the church office building. We went into the archives, and I'm thinking that we got the call number of the library, the call slip from the Tanners. Oh, I've got it in there. I still have the call slip in there. But I'm thinking, how do we know what that number was? I think we got it from Sandra, if I recall correctly. How else would we have known? But anyways, the point is, we went trembling in here to get this photocopy of this page from Joseph Smith's diary from 1834, as I recall. One of the earliest handwritten accounts of the first vision, where there are not two divine beings. And this is 14 years after it allegedly happened. Joseph Smith had not developed his concept of the plurality of gods yet. That was a couple years in the future. And I carried that thing around. We used that photocopy for a long, long time. And we had to show that to Mormons because other than quote-unquote anti-Mormon literature, that's the only place you could find it. We could tell people, here, you can go look for yourself. Now you can walk into the Deseret book across the street from the temple, and about the only theology books, do you remember how big that store was? You could walk up and down the aisles. You would simply be stunned if you went in there now.
Do you remember, I think it was the first time I went with you, and that we went downstairs, and they had the used book section. Do you remember how massive the used book section was when we started kind of taking into account how many different works and comments and words there were just in explaining and categorizing Mormonism?
Yeah.
It was just massive amount of words of all this stuff for Mormons to digest.
But even the new stuff, I mean, you could just walk up and down shelves, up and down shelves, up and down shelves. All the writings, and Bruce R. McConkie had his own huge section. You would just be stunned if you walked into Deseret Book today. It looks like your local Christian bookstore, trinkets, plaques. The whole temple section is wide open, which is unusual. The scripture section is fairly small, with all the triples and quads and stuff like that. But the theology section's almost non-existent. And like I said, Bruce R. McConkie, a grand total of 5 books. And that's not 5 different books. I think it was 3 books, 2 copies, 1 copy. It's almost like it never even existed.
Well, here again, we have a circumstance. We were talking about this in the 90s nationally. We were seeing it happen in our own circles. the dumbing down of America, the American church as a whole, the entire society, the entire world, and that's the result of it. Why would we study these things? Why would they look at their own history? Why would they look at any of it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, you look at Jehovah's Witnesses. They're facing the same society. Mm-hmm. They're facing the same challenges, much lower baptisms. Because they don't handle postmodernism very well either, but they never had the centrality of a subjective testimony problem that Mormonism has.
There's also they're a little bit more reclusive, aren't they? The shunning,
more controlling. Yeah, but they're going door to door, so that they're pretty exposed when they do something like that. Even though they're taught not to get in debates and stuff like that, so they try to keep them from being exposed to a lot of stuff. The internet's made a huge difference there too.
Yeah,
internet, cable television, they can't control their people anymore. But there's something, and this was my argument with Alma. There's something in Mormonism that is inherently making the encounter with the modern world much more difficult for them. And you just see it. It's fracturing. It's fracturing it. And I never, ever, ever, ever expected to see the Mormon leadership caving on issues of sexual morality, or especially homosexuality or transgenderism. Their God is gendered. I mean, you want patriarchy? Mormonism's the very definition of patriarchy. I mean, oh my goodness. You're just left going, what is going on? It is truly amazing. And there is a crisis of leadership in the LDS Church. And there's many Mormons who will admit it. They're just not put under nearly the same microscope as the Vatican is. But there's a lot of parallels between what's going on between the two of them, to be perfectly honest with you. It's fascinating. It really is. Could not have predicted that one. Could not have seen that one coming in any way, shape, or form.